Previously, Fang Yuan seized the Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus and destroyed the Gu Yue clan's spirit spring. But before he could escape, a mysterious force dragged him deep beneath Qing Mao Mountain into an enormous underground blood lake filled with bones, corpses, and ancient secrets. Now Fang Yuan discovers traces of the legendary Blood Sea Ancestor's inheritance, while the divine investigator Tai Xue Leng descends into the hidden graveyard and confronts the terrifying first-generation Gu Yue ancestor. As Blood River Python, blade-winged bloodbats, and powerful rank 5 Gu clash across the cavern, Fang Yuan finds himself trapped between two monsters far beyond his current strength. Even the spring-autumn cicada refuses to obey him, forcing Fang Yuan to sacrifice his future potential and use the stone aperture Gu just to survive. Let's continue with Reverend Insanity, Episode 22. Wait, baked earth? Fang Yuan's gaze settled on the reddish soil, and something stirred in his mind. He reached out, gripped the rock wall beside him, and tore free a chunk of the baked earth. The material was porous and gave off a faint red glow. Fang Yuan pressed it lightly between his fingers, and it crumbled without the slightest resistance. So that's how it is. Understanding flashed through him. He remembered the first time he had entered the stone crevice. The passage had been filled with this kind of baked earth, glowing dimly enough that no lamp had been needed. At the time, he had found it strange. The soil of Qing Mao Mountain was normally blue-black. He had assumed the flower wine monk had arranged it somehow, but now it seemed the true source was this eerie blood lake. The unease in Fang Yuan's heart deepened. 500 years of experience had long since settled into a nearly instinctive sense for danger. This place isn't merely strange. Peril lies in every direction. Time is pressing. How do I get out? He raised his head and studied the cavern walls. Which of those openings connected back to the spirit spring chamber? Fang Yuan hesitated. Water could flow through a passage that a person could never fit through, and besides, his expression turned grave as he tested the wings behind him. The lightning wings were no longer as responsive as before. The originally deep blue arcs of electricity were now mixed with a bizarre blood-red glow, creating two contradictory impressions at once frail, yet violently powerful. In this state, Thunderwing's Gu was completely unreliable. It might fail without warning and send Fang Yuan plummeting in midair. Splash, splash! An unseen current suddenly surged beneath the blood lake. The terrifying aura of a rank 5 Gu worm seeped out from the depths. That is, Fang Yuan's pupils contracted. A long black shadow slowly emerged within the bloody water. It was more than 40 meters long and over 6 meters thick. A colossal python lived at the bottom of the lake. Now that it had caught the scent of living flesh from Fang Yuan, it seemed ready to rise and hunt. Damn it! Urgency flooded his heart. At that moment, he was hanging against the baked earth wall with the giant-toothed golden centipede driven into the rock for support. Wrapped in black robes, his long dark hair trailing around him, he looked like a tiny black ant suspended above an endless sea of blood. Then hundreds of black specks appeared beneath the surface. They swam upward like a school of fish. Whoosh! They were even faster than the giant python. In an instant, they broke through the surface and revealed their true forms. They were not fish, they were bats. These dark crimson bats had long pointed ears and 2 pairs of wings. The larger primary wings spread above a small secondary pair beneath them. They had no claws, but the edges of both pairs of wings were razor-sharp, no different from steel blades. Rank 3 blade-winged bloodbat Gu? The answer immediately appeared in Fang Yuan's mind. As he watched the murderous swarm rush toward him, a scene resurfaced in his memory. It was the image preserved by the image sound recording Gu. The flower wine monk covered in blood, mortally wounded and on the verge of death. Moonshadow Gu could never have inflicted injuries like those. But a swarm of blade-winged bloodbats certainly could. Could the flower wine monk have reached this place? Was he actually wounded by these blade-winged bloodbats? Fang Yuan's thoughts moved rapidly. The true cause of the flower wine monk's death had always remained a mystery. Now this explanation seemed highly plausible. Blade-winged bloodbats. Fang Yuan murmured the name inwardly. He was far from unfamiliar with this Gu. Although it was only rank 3, it was extremely easy to feed. All it needed was blood. In his previous life, Fang Yuan had founded the Blood-Winged Demon Sect and used the blade-winged bloodbat as its emblem. With the resources of the demonic sect, he had raised nearly 10,000 of them. Their terrifying reputation spread far and wide. More precisely, the blade-winged bloodbat had been the foundation upon which he first rose. More than 400 years into his previous life, Fang Yuan had stumbled upon one of Blood Sea Ancestor's inheritances. Relying on the blade-winged bloodbats and his rank 5 cultivation, he became an overlord of his region. Blood Sea Ancestor had been a rank 7 demonic Gu master, infamous for slaughtering without restraint. His vile reputation had endured throughout history. He had originally been a mortal. Through a fortunate encounter, he became a demonic Gu master and clawed his way upward from the lowest levels. After more than 800 years, he became a great demonic giant. His aptitude had not been high, and the primeval essence stored in his aperture had always been limited. Because of this, he developed an obsessive interest in Gu fusion. Wild Gu possessed the will of nature and could absorb natural primeval energy from the world around them. But after a Gu master refined a wild Gu, its natural will was enslaved by human will. It would lose the ability to absorb ambient primeval energy and could only draw primeval essence from its master's aperture. Blood Sea Ancestor wanted to create Gu worms that could be refined by Gu masters while still retaining the ability to absorb natural primeval energy. The Righteous Path feared this research deeply. They were terrified that Blood Sea Ancestor might truly succeed, and they organized several encirclements in an attempt to kill him. In the end, Blood Sea Ancestor did not fully succeed, but neither did he fail completely. He developed secret fusion recipes for the blade-winged blood bat, blood guillotine, and blood frenzy Gu. The rank 3 blade-winged blood bat was his earliest achievement. It was extremely easy to feed, though it still required a Gu master's primeval essence to function. However, a swarm of blade-winged blood bats formed a highly unusual collective. A Gu master only needed to control the single male bat in the swarm to indirectly command all the females. Blood Frenzy Gu was his second achievement. This Gu had no fixed form. It existed as a cloud of blood chi, and could survive only by attaching itself to another object. It was a rank 4 Gu with an extremely peculiar effect. Any Gu worm contaminated by its aura could begin absorbing natural primeval energy, but it also carried a severe drawback. Gu worms influenced by Blood Frenzy Gu would gradually stop obeying their master. After enough time passed, they would dissolve into pools of blood. Blood Guillotine was his final achievement. At rank 5, it was far more complete than its two predecessors. It combined feeding and use into a single system, sustaining war through war itself. By devouring the blood of Gu masters, it could reproduce through division. It no longer required any primeval essence from its master. Unfortunately, after creating Blood Guillotine, Blood Sea Ancestor became embroiled in war and was surrounded by the Righteous Path. In the end, he was defeated. He suffered a fatal wound that could not be healed and used a blood escape method to break through the encirclement. The righteous Gu masters feared he might turn back and counterattack. None dared pursue too aggressively, and they watched him flee into the distance. Every time they later remembered that day, they regretted allowing their enemy to escape. Blood Sea Ancestor knew he would not live much longer, so he began scattering his inheritances across the world. Using the remaining strength of a rank 7 Gu master, he established hundreds of thousands of hidden inheritance grounds in an astonishingly short time, stretching from central continent all the way to southern border. Before dying, he gave a strange laugh. The blood path shall never stand alone. Its poison will plague the world for 10,000 generations. His words proved entirely true. Countless Gu masters benefited from his arrangements, and the demonic path flourished because of them. Whether it was the blade-winged blood bat, blood frenzy Gu, or blood guillotine, all were easy to feed and reproduce. Perhaps in an inconspicuous valley beneath a declining village, in an uninhabited desert, or beside a remote mountain road, 2 or 3 Gu worms casually left behind by Blood Sea Ancestor might be waiting. These Gu worms were easy to raise, demanded little primeval essence, and could be used by Gu masters of ordinary aptitude. In a world where survival from one day to the next was never guaranteed, what Gu master did not long for greater strength? The Gu worm's Blood Sea Ancestor left behind represented an entirely new kind of power. This power was quick, convenient, and far easier to obtain than most other paths. Naturally, it became immensely popular. Power itself was innocent. Used for good, it created good. Used for evil, it created evil. But how many people in this world possessed a will firm enough to resist the temptation of sudden strength? A man who became rich often grew unfaithful. A sudden surge of power gave birth to desires that had never existed before. Thus, many Gu masters who obtained Blood Sea Ancestors' inheritances became demons who slaughtered in every direction. Even many who had originally belonged to the Righteous Path changed sides because of them. The Blood Path inheritances brought enormous chaos and disaster to the world. A typical inheritance arranged by Blood Sea Ancestor contained only 2 or 3 Gu worms, yet those inheritances were like tiny sparks. If ignored for even a moment, they could ignite an entire grassland. Every so often, a demonic Gu master would obtain one of them and emerge to cause chaos. Some failed and were killed before they could even leave their village. Others achieved temporary success, built great momentum, and dominated an entire region. Whether they succeeded for a time or failed outright, when driven into a desperate corner, they would often refuse to let the inheritance die with them. Instead, they would leave behind a new blood path inheritance of their own. Because of this, the blood calamity never ended. It did not decline after Blood Sea Ancestor's death, nor after the Righteous Path devoted enormous effort to exterminating it. Instead, it spread deeper, concealed itself more thoroughly, and became impossible to eradicate. Righteous Gu masters often cursed bitterly. Damn those bloodpath Gu masters. Kill one and another appears. Look away for a moment, and an entire new crop has grown. By now, Blood Sea Ancestor's legacy was universally acknowledged as the most widespread and numerous inheritance system in existence. There was no close second. Strictly speaking, Fang Yuan himself had benefited greatly from Blood Sea Ancestor in his previous life. In my former life, it took me more than 400 years to find a Blood Sea inheritance and begin my rise to dominance. If I can subdue these blood bats now, I'll save myself 400 years. The blood bat surged toward him, but Fang Yuan felt no fear. He possessed the spring-autumn cicada. The aura of a rank 6 Gu was enough to make these bats scatter without fighting. The only thing he truly needed to fear was the rank 5 python hidden within the blood lake. But something about this is wrong. Blood Sea Ancestors' inheritances usually contained only 2 or 3 Gu worms. Why are there more than 100 blade-winged blood bats here? Could that rumor be true? There was an old rumor concerning Blood Sea Ancestor. Although he had established hundreds of thousands of inheritances, only a handful had been intended as his true legacies. Those few contained the Gu worms he had taken the greatest pride in, the deepest insights from his research, or the secret recipes he had perfected. Could this be one of Blood Sea Ancestor's true inheritances? At the thought, Fang Yuan's heart pounded. His mind moved at incredible speed. Countless thoughts passed through it, yet scarcely any time elapsed outside. The swarm of blade-winged bloodbats poured toward him. Fang Yuan's expression remained calm. Standing against the cliff wall, he prepared to summon the spring-autumn cicada. At that moment, an unexpected change occurred. As expected, a blood calamity truly is hidden here. A deep voice, firm as iron and stone, descended from above and reverberated throughout the sea of blood. Divine investigator Tie Xue Leng. Tai Xue Leng, why is he here? The instant Fang Yuan recognized the voice, shock struck his heart. The thunderous sound echoed repeatedly over the blood lake, driving the scarlet water into violent waves. Heaven and earth, magnificent sound Gu? Fang Yuan clenched his teeth as the voice pierced his eardrums and left his entire skull humming. Heaven and earth, magnificent sound Gu was a rank 5 sound path Gu. Once activated, it could unleash a sonic attack across an enormous area, making it a fearsome weapon against groups. What Fang Yuan had just heard was merely Tie Xue Leng giving a casual shout using a butcher's cleaver to kill a chicken. He had not truly activated the Gu at all. This level of precision was comparable to Fang Yuan using moonlight Gu to cut open purple gold rocks without damaging their cores. Naturally, Heaven and Earth Magnificent Sound Gu had a drawback. Prolonged use placed a tremendous burden upon the user's throat and vocal cords. Once that burden surpassed the body's limit, the Gu master would become completely mute and permanently lose the ability to speak. Boom! A massive wave suddenly erupted, spraying blood in every direction. Half of the giant python rose into Fang Yuan's view. Blood River Python. Fang Yuan's pupils contracted. Its entire body was covered in smooth, gleaming crimson scales. Its head was enormous, and golden bone spikes protruded from its face, emphasizing its savage and violent aura. Blood River Python. I remember the Gu Yue clan's history recording that shortly after the first-generation clan leader founded the village, a Blood River Python appeared and posed an enormous threat to the clan. According to the legend, the first-generation leader killed it. Could it be? Several possibilities immediately connected in Fang Yuan's mind. The Blood River Python was incomparably huge. Its head towered over the lake, and its cruel purple-red eyes stared at Fang Yuan. It was naturally ferocious, arrogant, and impossible to tame. It fed upon blood. Even the aura of the spring-autumn cicada would not frighten it into submission. It would only drive the beast into greater frenzy. Among rank 5 Gu worms, it was one of the most difficult to refine. Yet after glancing at Fang Yuan, the Blood River Python raised its head and turned toward the cavern ceiling. High above, a small figure slowly descended from one of the openings. He wore a bronze mask, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze cold and severe. Compared with the Blood River Python, he looked no larger than an ant. Yet an immense aura radiated from him, forming a vast invisible pressure that filled every direction. He seemed like a heavenly god descending into the mortal world. Righteous Qi Gu. This was a mind path Gu that could only be used by someone who genuinely carried righteousness within his heart. Those with guilty consciences or unstable wills would usually tremble beneath its influence. Their courage would collapse, their fighting spirit would rapidly decline, and they would begin to feel that Tai Xue Leng could never be defeated. Many would lose before the battle even began. Screech! 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 Under the pressure of righteous Qi, the blade-winged bloodbats descended into panic and let out piercing cries. Each seemed to bear an invisible mountain upon its body. Their 2 pairs of wings beat frantically as they struggled in the air, rising and falling without control. They could barely preserve themselves, much less continue attacking Fang Yuan. Even the savage Blood River python lowered its head slightly beneath Tie Xue Leng's overwhelming presence. What a powerful righteous Qi Gu! Clinging to the rock wall, Fang Yuan curled his lips into a cold smile. The pressure of righteous Qi had no effect on him. Only those whose wills were uncertain would be greatly weakened. He had once been a great demonic overlord. His heart was as hard as iron. How could an intangible aura like this frighten him? Seeing Fang Yuan remain completely unaffected, Tai Xue Leng could not suppress a quiet sound of surprise. Righteous Qi Gu had accompanied him for many years. He understood its effects intimately. Its power could be both tremendous and subtle. Because it attacked the heart directly, it sometimes achieved astonishing results. On rare occasions, an enemy would retreat without a fight. But cases in which someone felt nothing at all were rarer still. Even members of the righteous path usually experience considerable pressure. After all, belonging to a faction did not determine good and evil, and no one was flawless. Tie Xue Leng also knew Fang Yuan had committed grave crimes. From the first time they met, he had secretly planted a Gu mark on Fang Yuan in order to track him. From then onward, Tie Xue Leng had been able to sense changes in Fang Yuan's surroundings. Under the influence of righteous Qi Gu, most people burdened by sin would experience wavering hearts. However, Tie Xue Leng had encountered some demonic Gu masters who could continue fighting fiercely beneath its pressure and remain almost unaffected. There is only one kind of person who can commit crimes and still resist righteous Qi Gu completely. Such people possess true demonic nature. Deep within their hearts, they are stubborn to the point of madness. They do not regard their crimes as crimes at all. They believe everything they have done is perfectly natural. I never expected Fang Yuan's demonic nature to be this deep. I'll deal with the greater demon first. If this boy happens to survive, I won't mind killing him afterward. Tai Xue Leng hated evil as though it were his mortal enemy. With a cold snort, he turned his attention toward the Blood River python. The instant he appeared, the python had locked onto him. If Tai Xue Leng divided his attention to kill Fang Yuan, he would expose an opening. He carried terrible injuries, and an even stronger enemy remained hidden behind the scenes, perhaps watching him from the shadows. Tai Xue Leng did not dare disperse his focus. He studied the Blood River python for a moment, then looked past it toward the Blood Lake behind. Not long ago, he had received a mysterious letter. The evidence within it had been extraordinarily precise, clearly stating that a blood calamity was hidden beneath Gu Yue village. The letter had been delivered from the sky, in the beak of a white crane. Its origin was deeply suspicious. Yet Tai Xue Leng would rather believe such a threat existed than dismiss it. A blood calamity could never be underestimated. If neglected for even a short time, it could expand across the land, spread in every direction, and bring disaster to countless lives. The best method was to destroy its source before it had time to gain momentum. Coincidentally, Tie Xue Leng had already accepted a commission. Jia Fu had paid a heavy price to hire the divine investigator and uncover the cause of Jia Jinsheng's death. Thus, Tie Xue Leng brought his daughter to Qing Mao Mountain. He allowed Tie Ruonan to investigate the Jia Jinsheng case, partly to train and temper her, and partly to provide a public distraction, while he secretly investigated the blood calamity from behind the scenes. When Tie Xue Leng first met Fang Yuan, he had placed shared perception Gu upon him. The act had seemed casual, but it had also arisen from the intuition and experience he had accumulated over decades. Shared perception Gu was invisible and colorless, resembling a hidden mark. Tie Xue Leng had placed dozens of such marks over the years, yet the one he had attached to Fang Yuan, almost as an afterthought, had become the truly useful one. Gu Yue Ancestor, I know you are not dead. You have lain here for more than 1,000 years and arranged this entire scheme. Unfortunately, after coming this far, you are about to fail at the final step. As the moment Tie Xue Leng spoke, his voice filled the entire cavern. The Blood Lake showed no unusual reaction. Instead, the Blood River python opened its enormous jaws, raised its head, and roared. Its nature was inherently savage. The pressure of righteous Qi Gu only inflamed its ferocity further. Boom! The python lunged upward. Its colossal body raised towering waves of blood as it struck toward Tai Xue Leng in the air with murderous force. Tai Xue Leng had long been prepared. He shifted his body sharply and evaded the Blood River python's bite. The python's body was too long and its attack too powerful. Its head crashed directly into the cavern ceiling. A deafening rumble erupted. The ceiling collapsed, and countless rocks rained down, instantly raising enormous waves across the Blood Lake. Old Gu Yue, do you truly believe leaving behind a single Blood River python would protect everything? You might as well show yourself. Tai Xue Leng gave a faint smile. He drifted through the air, avoiding the python's frenzied attacks as though they were no more than a gentle breeze and fine rain. The Blood River python roared wildly, becoming even more violent. Its strength was incomparable. Every uncontrolled movement released terrifying destructive force. the entire underground space shook more violently, as though the mountain itself were being overturned. Great waves rolled endlessly across the Blood Lake. Damn it! Fang Yuan was struck by the disaster through no fault of his own. The porous baked earth ledge beneath him had already been destroyed. He could only rely upon the giant-toothed golden centipede and Thunderwings Gu to move across the cliff face, while chunks of broken stone fell as densely as rain. Just as Fang Yuan had expected, Thunderwings Gu was in terrible condition. The lightning wings behind him were weak and dispirited, unable to provide enough lift for flight, yet something strange was happening. Thunderwings Gu was drawing very little primeval essence from Fang Yuan. As he moved, it occasionally began absorbing natural primeval energy from the surrounding air. At first, these episodes were brief and rare. Fang Yuan was occupied with avoiding falling debris and did not immediately notice. But gradually, the phenomenon occurred more often, and each episode lasted longer than the last. At the same time, the lightning wings grew increasingly feeble. Blood Frenzy Gu! A flash of understanding crossed Fang Yuan's mind. Only contamination by Blood Frenzy Gu could produce such a condition. Boom! Despite using all his strength, Fang Yuan still fell into the Blood Lake. The Blood River python lashed out wildly, sweeping its enormous tail through the cavern. Broken rocks continued to rain from above. Fang Yuan activated Sky Canopy Gu, and a layer of white illusory armor covered his entire body. His swimming ability was quite good. In his previous life, he had lived in Eastern Sea for a long time, and trained extensively in the water. He strained to avoid boulders as large as houses, sometimes swimming aside, sometimes diving beneath the blood to use the liquid itself to lessen the impact. But he had no time to evade the smaller rocks, some no larger than fists, others as large as millstones. The white illusory armor was sturdy, but it could not fully disperse the force striking his body. Every rock that hit him brought a fresh burst of pain. At the same time, each impact forced the armor to consume more primeval essence from his aperture. Fortunately, the pressure of righteous Qi still covered the area, keeping the blade-winged bloodbats in chaotic flight and preventing them from coming after Fang Yuan. But his expression grew increasingly grave. Thunderwings Gu was almost ruined. Once contaminated by Blood Frenzy Gu, a Gu worm needed a specialized cleansing method. Without one, Thunderwings Gu would soon dissolve into a pool of blood and become a new source of contamination. How had it been infected? Considered every possibility and arrived at only one explanation. Blood Frenzy Gu was present within the Blood Lake itself. Thunderwings Gu continued weakening and had already begun showing signs of resisting his control. Fortunately, Fang Yuan had activated Sky Canopy Gu in time. Otherwise, Blood Frenzy Gu could have attached itself directly to his body, allowed its aura to seep into his aperture, and contaminated most of his Gu worms. But if his primeval essence ran out, or if the white armor shattered, the consequences would still be catastrophic.
I need to leave immediately.
Fang Yuan gritted his teeth as the waves lifted and submerged him. He searched in every direction for an exit. Large sections of baked earth had been knocked from the cliff walls. The cavern ceiling had changed beyond recognition. Tai Xue Leng floated in the air, battling the Blood River python. A clash between rank 5 existences was far beyond anything Fang Yuan could interfere with. The higher one rose in cultivation, the more enormous the gap between ranks became. A single sweep of the Blood River python's tail might shatter his armor, inflict severe backlash upon Sky Canopy Gu, and break every bone in his body. A casual strike from Tai Xue Leng might likewise place him at death's door. The situation was like two elephants fighting while Fang Yuan was a cat trapped beside them. His claws might be sharp, but he had no place in their contest. Wait, an opening? The cave entrance was not large. It had probably been buried beneath baked earth before. But the Blood Lake was now surging in violent waves. The currents had washed away sections of the baked earth wall, causing them to collapse into the lake. Only then had the opening been exposed. Whatever lay beyond, it represented hope. Fang Yuan immediately changed direction and swam toward it. Boom! Another thunderous explosion sounded in the air. The shockwave struck his body and shoved him several meters forward. Damn it, he cursed. A large mass of baked earth collapsed and buried the opening again. Iron Hand Capture Gu. High above, Tai Xue Leng drew a deep breath. Choosing the proper instant, he slowly extended his right hand. The air before him rippled. A gigantic black iron hand appeared. It seemed to move slowly, yet crossed the distance in a flash and seized toward the Blood River python's tail. The python struggled violently. Its scales were covered in water, but none penetrated them. The liquid simply slid away. The iron hand failed to secure the tail. It scraped across the python's scales instead, sending sparks flying. Tai Xue Leng possessed rich battle experience and showed no discouragement. He leaned backward, puffed out his cheeks, and blew forcefully toward the Blood River python. Whoosh! A torrent of pitch-black oil poured out like a waterfall. In midair, the oil transformed into the shape of a dragon. Bearing its fangs and claws, it coiled around the Blood River python. Oil Dragon Gu! The Blood River python roared in rage and tore at it with its jaws. The black oil dragon was nearly as large as the python, but it was only a rank 4 Gu and lacked a true physical body. In moments, the Blood River python ripped it to pieces. Tai Xue Leng smiled instead. A beast was still a beast. If a Gu master had been controlling the Blood River python personally, he would have seen through such a classic and ordinary tactic. Although the python had been refined and carried a Gu master's will, it did not possess human intelligence. With the oil dragon destroyed, Oil Dragon Gu suffered backlash within Tai Xue Leng's aperture. He paid it no attention. He stopped activating Oil Dragon Gu and began activating Fire Dragon Gu. With a shout, his body trembled. A flame-like Gu worm shot from his aperture and quickly became a fiery serpent that coiled around him. The serpent flew outward and grew larger with every instant. Scales appeared, followed by eagle claws, deer antlers, a horse-like face, and sharp teeth. In the blink of an eye, it had become a colossal fire dragon. Fire Dragon Gu was also a rank 4 Gu, yet when it attacked the Blood River python, the python roared in pain. Because of the earlier oil dragon, a large amount of black oil clung to the python's body. The moment the fire dragon wrapped around it, the oil ignited. Flames instantly engulfed the Blood River python from head to tail. More oil floated across the lake's surface. Now it also caught fire, turning the Scarlet Blood Lake into a sea of flames. The air grew hotter with every breath. The fire dragon was not the Blood River python's equal. It suffered severe injuries repeatedly, and its body gradually shrank. But every time this happened, it plunged into the sea of fire and rolled through the flames, restoring part of its form. Within a sea of fire, the fire dragon possessed the advantage of terrain. The Blood River python fought it for some time. Its body was continuously scorched, and the smell of roasted flesh began filling the cavern. The python was naturally violent and would retaliate ferociously whenever pressured. Yet even it was eventually forced to retreat. It abandoned the fire dragon and dove into the depths of the Blood Lake. Humans were the spirit of all living things because they possessed wisdom and could create new methods. Using only 2 rank 4 Gu worms and a carefully designed tactic, Tai Xue Leng had forced the rank 5 Blood River python to withdraw. But Gu worms were the essence of heaven and earth. Each contained fragments of the world's laws. The Blood River python's ability was extraordinary regeneration. It descended to the bottom of the lake, where the blood continuously nourished it. Its wounds quickly began closing. Fire Dragon Gu benefited from the Sea of Fire, but the Blood River python likewise benefited from the Blood Lake. As long as the Blood Lake remained, the python was virtually impossible to kill. Fang Yuan's situation became even more dangerous. Flames spread across the surface of the lake, burning fiercely and beginning to lick at his body. The burden on Sky Canopy Gu increased. More importantly, Fang Yuan was finding it increasingly difficult to breathe. The fire consumed enormous amounts of air. This underground chamber was only partly ventilated, and fresh air could not enter quickly enough. Fang Yuan gradually began to suffocate. Oil Dragon Gu and Fire Dragon Gu working together can temporarily force the Blood River python back, but only temporarily. As long as this volume of blood remains, its regenerative power is terrifying. When it charges out again, it will have returned to peak condition. Fire Dragon Gu may no longer be its opponent. No, this is obvious. Tai Xue Leng cannot possibly have overlooked it. Then his true intention is. Fang Yuan rose and sank among the waves while his thoughts moved rapidly. His heart tightened as he reached a conclusion. If his judgment was correct, driving back the Blood River python had merely fulfilled the first stage of Tai Xue Leng's plan. Tai Xue Leng needed time. Whenever a powerful combatant deliberately created time for himself, it usually meant he was preparing a killing move. And sure enough, Tai Xue Leng suddenly spread both arms while floating in the air and released a deep, rumbling roar. The righteous ki filling the cavern converged toward him. With complete concentration, he poured rank 5 primeval essence into the bronze mask upon his face. The bronze mask gradually began to shine. At first, the glow was faint. Within several breaths, it became an intensely dazzling jade-green radiance, like a fragment torn from the sun. Ancient green light illuminated everything, descending with the majesty of a ruler over heaven and earth. The baked earth, Blood Lake, and Sea of Flames were all dyed in that archaic green. A mysterious power lay within the radiance. Under its influence, the surrounding stone began to break apart. A massive boulder collapsed from the ceiling, then flew toward the bronze mask. Large amounts of earth and stone also separated from the surrounding walls and slowly rose through the air. Tai Xue Leng's expression disappeared behind the bronze light. The gathered stone clustered around the mask, fused together, and formed the shape of a human. More earth and stone continued joining it. The stone figure grew larger and larger, first 1 meter, then 3, 5, 8, until it finally reached a height of 18 meters. Mountain Giant Puppet Gu. The heaven-supporting giant descended upon the Blood Lake battlefield. Its legs stood deep within the lake, yet the blood only reached its waist. Its body was incomparably massive. A horse-drawn carriage could race across either palm, and an elephant could stand upon one of its fists. Its features were ancient and simple, like an enlarged version of Tie Xue Leng's bronze mask. "Fire dragon, come." The giant opened its mouth. Its voice shook heaven and earth. The fire dragon lying within the sea of flames immediately soared upward. Like a serpent, it coiled around the giant's right arm and rested its head upon the right shoulder. Oil Dragon Gu flew out once more and transformed into a pitch-black dragon. It climbed the giant's left arm and placed its head upon the left shoulder. With twin dragons upon its shoulders, the mountain giant resembled a colossal divine warrior descending from the heavens. Fang Yuan struggled toward the cave entrance. The giant puppet's appearance had pulled away the stone blocking it, exposing the passage once again. The battlefield was becoming more dangerous by the moment, and the opening could be buried again at any time. Fang Yuan did not dare linger. The flames across the lake gradually weakened. Then enormous waves suddenly rose from the blood. The Blood River python charged out of the lake and coiled around the giant puppet, climbing its body. Its massive head was like a battering ram, aimed directly at the puppet's face. The strike was both swift and violent. More than half of the giant's head shattered. "Iron Hand capture!" The giant puppet roared. The air ruptured and another iron hand shot outward, seizing the python's head. Boom! The iron hand was destroyed, but the Blood River python's charge was also stopped. Tai Xue Leng gained a brief chance to breathe. The giant puppet reached out with both hands, one from the front and one from behind, and seized the Blood River python's body. Oil Dragon and Fire Dragon moved at the same instant. They climbed onto the python and merged their assault, forming raging flames that burned across its body. The Blood River python roared repeatedly in pain and struggled with all its strength, but Tai Xue Leng would never allow it to escape so easily. The giant puppet's hands were like iron pincers, clamping the python in place. Unable to flee, the Blood River python's body was roasted black. The smell of charred flesh spread across the lake. Its savage nature was fully provoked. Instead of continuing to retreat, it wrapped its long body around the giant puppet again, and began constricting with terrifying force. Although the giant puppet was formed from rock and earth, its body was porous like baked clay. Under the python's constriction, its waist visibly narrowed. Cracking sounds rang out. Broken stones sprayed in every direction. Stimulated by the threat of death, the Blood River python erupted with astonishing power. Fang Yuan finally reached the cave opening. At that moment, several muffled coughs came from within the giant puppet. Tai Xue Leng's old injuries had flared up. The puppet's hands loosened. The Blood River python shrieked and thrashed violently. The hands tightened again. The python opened its enormous jaws, exposing rows of sharp teeth. Its head twisted madly, but after several moments, its movements slowed. Its desperate counterattack had failed. It was gradually exhausting itself. If this continued, it would be burned to death. But at that moment, a dense layer of blood mist suddenly rose from the middle of the lake. "Blood Frenzy Gu!" Wariness flashed in Fang Yuan's eyes. He immediately climbed into the cave entrance and ran deeper inside. The blood mist expanded rapidly. The flames on the lake were completely extinguished. A whirlpool appeared at the center of the blood lake. It grew larger and larger. At first, it occupied only the center, but it quickly spread until its edges reached all four cavern walls. Gu Yue Ancestor, you finally couldn't endure any longer. A cold snort came from inside the giant puppet. At the heart of the whirlpool, a pillar of blood suddenly surged more than 10 meters above the lake. Within the rising wave, a dark red coffin slowly emerged. Ha 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 ha! A dry and eerie laugh came from inside, chilling everyone who heard it. "Junior, you dare ruin this ancestor's great undertaking? Since you seek death, this ancestor shall grant it." Before the final word faded, the coffin lid shot away. A shriveled corpse was revealed within. It had blood-red fangs and hair as crimson as fresh blood. Deep within its hollow eye sockets, its eyes glowed like dying embers. It had no skin. Dry red muscles clung directly to white bone, giving it a gaunt yet ferocious appearance. "Junior, hidden injuries plague your body, yet you still dare come here and provoke this ancestor. Today, your death is certain." The corpse spoke without moving its mouth. The voice came from its abdomen instead. Its manner of speech was archaic, using words and phrasing that had belonged to people from 1,000 years ago. Rank 5 Blood Wight Zombie Gu. Could he truly be the first-generation ancestor? Even Fang Yuan could not prevent his surprise. In this miraculous world, there were many Gu masters who had survived for centuries. The orthodox method was to use lifespan Gu to extend one's life. But there were also unorthodox and demonic methods that allowed a person to persist between heaven and earth. Rank 2 Roaming Zombie Gu was one example. After using this Gu for a long time, A Gu master would completely transform into a zombie. As long as they drank blood at regular intervals, they could continue moving freely and cling to life in a crude form of immortality. The Gu Yue ancestor before him had clearly used such a method. Blood Wight Zombie Gu was one of the major advancement paths of roaming zombie Gu. Together with Asura Zombie, Heavenly Demon Zombie, Nightmare Zombie, and Plague Zombie, it was known as one of the 5 great flying zombies. Lifespan Gu was difficult to find. Thus, the first-generation Gu Yue ancestor had transformed himself into a Blood Wight and buried himself here. Across the Blood Lake, 2 great powers confronted each other. Even if you possess rank 5 Blood Wight Zombie Gu, you are still nothing more than a corpse, the stone giant said coldly. First-generation Gu Yue, you are no longer alive. Your body is filled with death chi, and your aperture is dead as well. It may still store primeval essence, but every portion you use is gone forever. You cannot recover it by yourself. Ha 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 ha. So what if I cannot recover primeval essence naturally? First-generation Gu Yue's voice boomed through the cavern. I can still absorb primeval essence from primeval stones. You carry grave injuries, yet you dare disturb this ancestor. Die, blood mist erupted. Waves rose into the sky. A large group of Gooms flew from the Blood Lake. They were rank 5 Blood Guillotines. At the same time, swarm after swarm of blade-winged blood bats poured from openings along the cavern ceiling and walls. They joined the Gu worms rising from the lake and attacked the stone giant together. The enormous bat swarm contained more than 1,000 Gu worms and instantly formed a great army. Although each was only rank 3 and specialized in close combat, their numbers compensated for their lower rank. Even a rank 5 Gu master like Tie Xue Leng would suffer a headache when facing so many. And this was still not the end. The consciousness of the first-generation Gu Yue ancestor had fully awakened. Answering his summons, more swarms of blood bats continuously appeared and gathered toward the battlefield. He had operated here for nearly 1,000 years, pursuing a purpose hidden from all others. Long ago, he had transformed this place into his lair and seized every advantage of the terrain. The blood bats formed disciplined ranks and circled through the air like an elite army, surrounding the stone giant. The Blood River python stopped struggling and contracted its body, forcing Tie Xue Leng to remain wary and devote his full attention to it. Gu worms might be powerful, but their intelligence was limited. An army of blood bats controlled by a Gu master was worlds apart from an uncontrolled swarm. The moment first-generation Gu Yue entered the battle, he reversed the situation and suppressed Tie Xue Leng. He possesses the advantage of terrain and has waited here in comfort, while Tie Xue Leng is already wounded. This may end badly for him. Fang Yuan hid within the darkness at the cave entrance and observed the battle in secret. But Tie Xue Leng has traveled throughout southern border for many years. Even while heavily injured, he dared enter this demonic lair. He must possess something he can rely upon. No matter what happens, the next stage will be a brutal battle to the death. If things go poorly, this entire place may collapse. Should I remain and watch? Staying would be extremely dangerous. We are deep beneath the mountain. I could easily be buried alive. But what are the chances of benefiting as the fisherman while 2 tigers fight? Fang Yuan's thoughts moved swiftly as he weighed the advantages and dangers. His cultivation was still only rank 3 initial stage. Remaining to watch the battle carried an enormous risk. A single stray shockwave might severely injure him. Yet if both sides exhausted each other and Fang Yuan emerged as the final beneficiary, the gains would be immense. These were rank 5 existences. Obtaining even a portion of their wealth could save him 100 years of bitter accumulation. The greater the danger, the greater the reward. Fang Yuan sighed, but his intention to withdraw grew stronger. He had already lost control of the situation. Staying was far too dangerous. Birds died for food and men died for wealth. During his 500 years of life, he had seen such endings countless times. He was cautious by nature. As long as the Green Mountain remained, there would always be firewood to burn. Moreover, Fang Yuan knew many secrets and the locations of numerous inheritances that had yet to be revealed. Those alone promised abundant benefits. There was no need to gamble his life here. Just as Fang Yuan prepared to leave, a group of blood bats separated from the army and flew directly toward him. There were nearly 100 of them. Fang Yuan immediately turned and retreated. "Junior of my clan, do not be afraid." First-generation Gu Yue's voice called from afar. The passage contains traps and fierce beasts occupy the underground tunnels. These blood bats will protect your safety. After hearing this, Fang Yuan fled even faster. First-generation Gu Yue gave a cold snort. He had not expected someone so young to possess such a nimble mind and instantly recognize his malicious intent. With a thought, he sent another 100 blood bats after Fang Yuan. This slight distraction was enough for Tie Xue Leng to detect an opening. Heaven and earth, magnificent sound Gu. Roar. The stone giant opened its mouth and released a roar that shook the 9 heavens. In an instant, the sound expanded across the entire cavern, rolling through every direction like thunder descending from the sky. The nearby blade-winged bloodbats were killed outright by the immense sound and fell like rain. Even the distant swarms were thrown into complete disarray and scattered through the air. The dense bloodbat army collapsed in a single moment, losing all ability to act as a unified force. Heaven and Earth Magnificent Sound Gu was a rank 5 Gu specialized in wide-area attacks, making it particularly effective against swarms like these blade-winged bloodbats. Tai Xue Leng had used it once before, but its power had seemed limited because he had deliberately restrained it. Now, through the enormous body of the stone giant, the Gu finally revealed its true might. Even countless blood guillotines filling the sky were shattered by the sound. The blood mist vanished, and the air became clear again. Sonic waves reverberated from wall to wall, filling the entire underground space. The whole mountain shook violently. With the stone giant at the center, the surface of the blood lake was forced downward. The lake became shaped like a gigantic bowl. Blood overflowed into the cave passages and poured through the opening Fang Yuan had entered. But that passage had already been struck by the roar. Fang Yuan also suffered from the attack. His white illusory armor flashed violently and nearly collapsed. Resisting the sound consumed more than 10% of the primeval essence in his aperture in an instant. The sonic waves echoed repeatedly through the narrow tunnel. Fang Yuan's ears rang. His body staggered, and he nearly fell. Yet the roar also helped him. Of the two groups of bloodbats pursuing him, the second had been completely destroyed, while the first had been thrown into disarray by the sound. For the moment, the bats scattered chaotically through the tunnel and could no longer continue the pursuit. Fang Yuan seized the opportunity and fled, widening the distance between them. The bats that had been farthest from the roar quickly recovered. Beating both pairs of wings, they resumed the chase. There were nearly 100 blade-winged bloodbats, each at rank 3. Fang Yuan could not resist them directly and could only run with all his strength. At first, the tunnel was completely dark, and he could not tell where it led. But as his eyes gradually adjusted, he began to make out the interior. The baked earth gave off a faint glow. Although Thunderwing's Gu had become unreliable, it could still provide a small amount of assistance. Fang Yuan forced it to activate. Even then, the difference in speed remained significant. The bats rapidly closed the distance. They're too close. I'll have to use the Spring-Autumn Cicada. Fang Yuan gritted his teeth. The blade-winged bloodbats were only rank 3. The aura of a rank 6 Gu would certainly frighten them away. But Tai Xue Leng and first-generation Gu Yue were not far behind. The moment the Spring-Autumn Cicada appeared, it would cause a strange phenomenon. The disturbance would be great enough to attract both of their attention. Fang Yuan had no better choice. Under the circumstances, he could only hope the two rank 5 enemies remained locked in combat and had no attention to spare for him. Screech! 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 The bloodbats drew closer. They were now less than 100 steps away. Fang Yuan exhaled slowly and commanded inwardly, Spring-Autumn Cicada, come out! 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Fang Yuan froze in place. The Spring-Autumn Cicada remained motionless at the center of his aperture, radiating brilliant golden-green light. Why? Shock struck Fang Yuan. The eastern horizon gradually brightened. Dawn had arrived. On a mountainside, Gu Yue stood beside the clan leaders of Bai Village and Shong Village. Although the true 3-clan competition will be held tomorrow, a preliminary round is still necessary, the Shong clan leader said with a smile. The time has come. Shall we begin? The Bai clan leader gave a cold snort and did not bother replying. Then let us begin. Gu Yue answered absent-mindedly. He looked down at masters gathered below the slope and searched carefully among them, but Fang Yuan was nowhere to be seen. His concern deepened. All the Gu masters gathered there were young, none older than 30. They formed 3 distinct groups. At a glance, the strength of each village was obvious. Xiong Village had the greatest number of Gu masters because they had deliberately retreated during the Wolf Tide and preserved most of their forces. Gu Yue Village and Bai Village had fewer participants. However, Bao Village possessed Bai Ningbing. He alone was equivalent to the combined strength of the entire younger generation of his clan, placing Bai Village at the head of the 3. The Shong clan leader raised his voice. This preliminary competition will take place within a radius of 100 li. It will continue until sunset. Life and death will not be considered during combat, though I still hope all of you will show restraint where possible. Each participant has been issued a nameplate. Anyone who collects 30 nameplates will qualify to continue into the formal 3-clan competition. Begin! A life and death struggle. As long as the participants met the age requirement, there was no limit on the number of people who could fight together. The entire 100 li area could be used as the battlefield, and even ambushes along the roads were permitted. This was not a fair competition. Yet none of the 3 clan leaders objected. Survival in this world depended upon one's fists and one's strength. The strong possessed the qualifications to seize greater benefits. The weak could only blame their own misfortune. Keep a low profile, gather strength in silence, and strive to become strong themselves. Only several seconds had passed, yet to Fang Yuan they felt as long as 2 or 3 years. Cold sweat ran down his forehead. The spring-autumn cicada refused to emerge. What was happening? The spring-autumn cicada was his vital Gu. Its connection to him was profound. It was a rank 6 Gu and his final trump card, yet it was refusing his control. This situation was too serious to ignore. Within the dim tunnel, Fang Yuan narrowed his eyes. His confusion lasted less than half a second, before he forced himself to regain calm. Thoughts flashed through his mind like lightning. His consciousness entered his aperture. The spring-autumn cicada appeared no different than before. It continued recovering steadily, but regardless of how Fang Yuan commanded it, it remained entirely motionless. I understand. Realization struck him. Once the spring-autumn cicada becomes my vital Gu, it cannot leave my aperture. Gu worms were the true essence of all living things, profound and endlessly varied. The 3 disciplines of raising, using, and refining Gu were vast and deep, and individual Gu worms often possessed unique requirements. For feeding, certain Gu worms could eat only a specific amount or type of food. Refinement likewise involved special conditions. Use could be even more restrictive. Some Gu worms could only be used by an honorable Gu master, who had never spoken a lie in his entire life. Righteous Qi Gu required the Gu master to truly possess righteousness within the heart. Image sound recording Gu died after a single use, though the image and sound it preserved would remain attached to a stone wall for a period of time. Once the spring-autumn cicada was refined as a vital Gu, it could not move out of the aperture. This characteristic reminded Fang Yuan of a famous Gu Water Curtain Skyflower Gu. Water Curtain Skyflower Gu was only rank 4. Once activated, it transformed into an enormous spherical water barrier. Its defensive strength was exceptional, and could even resist attacks from rank 5 Gu worms, but it possessed a major weakness. The water barrier could not be moved, and once activated, it could not be stopped at will. It separated inside from outside so completely that even its owner could neither enter nor leave. Many factions used Water Curtain Skyflower Gu to defend their cities. Fang Yuan was not truly familiar with the spring-autumn cicada. In his previous life, he had been surrounded and attacked by the righteous path immediately after refining it successfully. He had never been given time to test it properly. Moreover, the spring-autumn cicada had not been his vital Gu then, so this characteristic had never revealed itself. In this life his cultivation was low, and he had never dared summon the spring-autumn cicada casually. The spring-autumn cicada was one of the world's most extraordinary Gu worms. It was profoundly mysterious, and so few people had ever used it that no reliable experience or knowledge had been passed down. Furthermore, once a Gu worm reached rank 6, it became unique in the world. Only one could exist at any given time. If another person attempted to refine the same rank 6 Gu while the first still lived, the fusion would fail without exception. Only now had Fang Yuan discovered this hidden characteristic. Rebirth is not simple. Spring-autumn conceals disaster. The spring-autumn cicada is recovering faster and faster. Even with A-grade aptitude and abundant resources, my cultivation may still be unable to increase as quickly as it recovers. Sooner or later, my aperture will be shattered by it. Fang Yuan gritted his teeth inwardly. Rebirth was immensely valuable, but possessing the spring-autumn cicada was almost like having half of a 10 extreme physique. From the moment of birth, one was already hanging beneath an executioner's blade. When the appointed time arrived, the sentence would fall. If I cannot release the spring-autumn cicada, can I only activate it and be reborn again? Fang Yuan frowned in thought. This appeared to be the only solution. Another rebirth would force the spring-autumn cicada back into its original weakened state, while also allowing Fang Yuan to escape his present danger. The idea sounded ideal. In reality, it contained severe problems and enormous risks. First, there was no guarantee that repeated rebirth would succeed. Fang Yuan had already experienced rebirth once and had gained valuable insight from it. He used concepts from Earth to understand the process. The world possessed 3 spatial dimensions, while time formed an axis. Traveling through time changed one's position along that axis while leaving spatial structure intact. Every movement of every object required a process, and every process consumed time. The world was unique. There were no parallel spaces or alternate worlds. For the spring-autumn cicada to create rebirth, it had to travel from the later portion of the axis, the future, to an earlier portion, the past. But Fang Yuan's aged body from the future did not exist within the time of the past. Bound by the great laws of heaven and earth, his physical body could not return. It could only self-detonate and die. The energy released by that explosion became the driving force. Meanwhile, the spring-autumn cicada contained fragments of the laws of time, allowing it to act like a solitary boat carrying Fang Yuan's consciousness from the future back into the past. Consciousness was different from the physical body. It was not purely material. Strictly speaking, the consciousness of the future should not exist within the past. Yet this was precisely where the miracle occurred. The future consciousness would lead the Gu Master to change himself, then influence his surroundings, and eventually expand that influence across the entire world. This was the butterfly effect. Once the butterfly effect appeared, the present world would become different from the world that had existed before. The future consciousness would then gain meaning and receive recognition from the great laws of heaven and earth. Someone had once compared history to a river. If the result of an event were changed upstream, everything downstream would also change. This miraculous Gu world was the water flowing through that long river. Most people could only travel from upstream to downstream, following the current. But Fang Yuan's consciousness, carried by the spring-autumn cicada, had traveled against the current from downstream back toward the source. Once he changed events upstream, the river below would also change. Yet the river remained the same river. The Gu Master world remained the Gu Master world. History had merely turned at a different bend and produced a different result. This comparison made the process easier to understand. But the spring-autumn cicada had not fully recovered. It was like a damaged boat riddled with holes. Fang Yuan was now only at rank 3 initial stage. The energy produced by self-detonating at this level was vastly inferior to the power he had possessed at rank 6 in his previous life. It might not be enough to drive the spring-autumn cicada backward through the river of time. If I self-detonate and attempt rebirth now, success is far from certain. The boat may break apart and become stranded in the river, while my memories are washed away by time and reduced to nothingness. To increase the chance of success, it would be best to wait until my aperture reaches its limit and delay as long as possible. That would allow the spring-autumn cicada to recover further and reduce the holes in the boat. At the same time, a higher cultivation level would release more energy when I self-detonate and provide greater force for traveling against the current. After reaching this conclusion, Fang Yuan exhaled slowly. The spring-autumn cicada's behavior had exceeded his expectations, but he had always been cautious and had prepared another measure in advance. The blood bats were already rushing toward his back. Fang Yuan's consciousness sank into his aperture. Golden-green light filled the aperture. The spring-autumn cicada radiated an immense aura. The silver primeval sea lay still as a mirror, but cracks had appeared across the surrounding light membrane, as though it could no longer endure the pressure. All his other Gu worms had been suppressed to the bottom of the primeval sea. Under Fang Yuan's command, one Gu worm resisted the pressure and slowly rose above the surface. It was shaped like a die square, gray-white, and exceptionally hard. Earlier, Fang Yuan had used Plunder Gu to seize several Gu worms from Binding Bing's aperture. This Gu was consumable and would vanish after a single use, but its effect was immense. Once activated, it would squeeze dry the foundation and potential of a Gu Master's aperture, forcibly raising the Gu Master's cultivation to the peak stage of the current rank. Stone Aperture Gu explode! At Fang Yuan's command, Stone Aperture Gu burst apart. Gray-white stone powder spread like mist and smoke, instantly filling the primeval sea. The aperture walls had originally been formed from a membrane of light. The moment the gray-white powder touched them, their radiance dimmed. The stone powder clung to the membrane's surface. The walls gradually thickened and transformed from light into solid stone. Within several seconds, the four walls of Fang Yuan's aperture had grown several times thicker, becoming a heavy and compact stone aperture. The spring-autumn cicada's golden-green light still flickered and shifted. But for the moment, the stone walls could withstand its aura. Fang Yuan had originally been at rank 3 initial stage and possessed light silver primeval essence. His primeval essence resembled water with a faint silver sheen. Now, his cultivation surged from initial stage directly to peak stage, and his primeval essence transformed into snow silver essence. Using Stone Aperture Gu is like cutting away a section of the road ahead. The potential inside the aperture has been exhausted, making it extremely difficult to advance to rank 4. But my cultivation has increased, and the aperture walls have become stone. They are several times stronger than before, and can temporarily endure the pressure of the spring-autumn cicada. Binding Bing also intended to use Stone Aperture Gu to resist the calamity of the Northern Dark Ice Soul physique. Unfortunately, a 10 extreme physique is even more troublesome than the spring-autumn cicada. Its potential is nearly endless. Even if the aperture is temporarily turned to stone, the walls will soon recover and return to their former state. At that moment, the bloodbats reached him. Fang Yuan gave a cold snort and drew the giant-toothed golden centipede, fighting while retreating. Fortunately, the tunnel was narrow. Relying on Sky Canopy Gu's defense and the broad body of the giant-toothed golden centipede, Fang Yuan prevented the blood bats from surrounding him. Their threat was greatly reduced. For a time, violent impacts echoed throughout the tunnel. The giant-toothed golden centipede struck repeatedly. Its silver-edged saw teeth collided with the blade-like wings of the blood bats and their defensive white light. The attacks came so quickly that the sounds merged into a continuous roar, alongside the crashes against the tunnel walls. The primeval essence in Fang Yuan's aperture fell rapidly. There were nearly 100 blood bats, but without a Gu master personally controlling them, they suffered heavy losses and coordinated poorly. In reality, Fang Yuan only needed to face 30 or 40 of them at any one time. Even that number was beyond what he could defeat directly. He could only fight while withdrawing. There was also an awkward problem. Although his cultivation had reached rank 3 peak stage, the primeval essence already present in his aperture was still light silver. With only C-grade aptitude, his aperture produced snow-silver primeval essence far too slowly. The current situation also gave Fang Yuan no opportunity to take out primeval stones and divide his attention to absorb their natural essence. Using primeval stones to recover quickly was not practical during direct combat. Dividing one's attention in a life-and-death struggle was foolish in the extreme, almost no different from seeking death. At the same time, primeval essence absorption became far less efficient while the Gu master was distracted. This method could only be used during ordinary cultivation or during a brief interval after creating enough distance from the enemy. Fortunately, Fang Yuan had recently obtained a grass-type Gu, the Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus. The Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus could produce primeval stones and was immensely precious. But that effect was only one expression of its true ability. It was also called a mobile primeval spring. Its fundamental power was to generate natural primeval essence. When enough of this essence condensed together, it formed primeval stones. The Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus now floated within the primeval sea of Fang Yuan's aperture, creating a miniature primeval spring inside him. The Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus had been created by Genesis Lotus Immortal Venerable. Only a Gu master who reached rank 9 could receive the reverence of the entire world. Those of the righteous path were called Immortal Venerables. Those of the demonic path were called Demon Venerables. For thousands of years, Genesis Lotus Immortal Venerable had been recognized as the greatest expert in primeval essence recovery. In this field, he surpassed every other Immortal Venerable and Demon Venerable. The reason was the profound accomplishments of his Lotus path. Fang Yuan's Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus was only rank 3 and had just been refined, so it remained at a low level. Even so, it could continuously supply him with natural primeval essence. The moment that essence appeared inside the aperture refined it into snow-silver primeval essence. If Fang Yuan wanted to absorb essence from primeval stones, he needed to divide his attention. But the Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus was his Gu worm. Activating it was as easy as bending a finger. Fang Yuan continued fighting while retreating. With the Heavenly Essence Treasure Lotus's assistance, his primeval essence recovery was already comparable to that of a B-grade Gu master. "Kill!" he suddenly shouted and changed his fighting style. Instead of continuing to retreat, he charged directly into the swarm. The giant-toothed golden centipede activated. Its silver-edged saw teeth spun with a harsh grinding sound and cut into a blood bat that had curled its head beneath its blade wings. This bat was slightly stronger than the others. It was also the only male in the swarm and had been refined by first-generation Gu Yue. By controlling it, one could indirectly command the entire group. Fang Yuan's sudden assault appeared impulsive, but he had actually prepared it in silence and observed the swarm for a long time. Since first-generation Gu Yue was not present to intervene personally, the tactic immediately succeeded. The male bat was struck and twisted into a mass of bloody flesh. The remaining bats instantly fell into disorder. There was only one male in the swarm. All the others were females that obeyed its commands. Male and female blade-winged blood bats looked almost identical, with only minor differences. But Fang Yuan had known this Gu intimately in his previous life. Given enough time, he could distinguish the male from the females. Without the male, the swarm immediately lost all coordination. Fang Yuan seized the chance and charged forward, swinging the giant-toothed golden centipede in a massacre. As time passed, more than 20 blade-winged blood bats were killed. The results were considerable, but the fierce battle also consumed a large amount of primeval essence from Fang Yuan's aperture. "It's time to leave." Fang Yuan withdrew decisively and ran at full speed. By the time the blood bats behind him recovered, he had already crossed more than 100 steps. Around 20 blade-winged blood bats continued pursuing Fang Yuan. The rest scattered in different directions.